and once you draw that wave function on the graph, there's certain where the electron can appear. There's certain places where it's more likely to appear if it's closer to like the center, but it's still indeterminate. And I'm just saying like purely random would be just imagine like a wave function that's just perfectly straight. Every possible place the electron could appear is equally likely. So that's kind of how I'm drawing the distinction.
They seem to not really be distinct.
Yeah, like look, so you understand like so just take the wave function example. You like how in a wave function there's some areas where the electron can appear when measured, and those areas are more probable than other areas. Like if the amplitude.
That's not going to really be real probability under the understanding of a normative virtue, right? If you're making
No, it is.
rather than a Bayesian apparatus, if you're using a frequentist account for which it happens X
Yeah,
amount
exactly.
of times in this location, therefore it's more probable. Well, the idea is going to be, well, just in virtue of what, of it being within that set of locality or state of affairs, will that somehow give some form of indicative virtue that it is the case that it ought to occur there more frequently?
No, I'm not talking about like
idea
I don't know if I follow you when you say like it ought to occur, but I'm saying like I just understand a probability like usually in like these sorts of frequentist terms. But like, just take like the frequentist apparatus. If that's all we're understanding probability to be, then I'll just cash out pure randomness to be randomness where all events have the same sort of relative frequency or so, because that's all probability would mean.
But when you say absolute randomness,
Yeah.
it's just like it seems like you're just predicating absolute without it generating any relevancy. It seems redundant.
No, but I don't know how you'd say that. The difference is just to say like take the wave function. Like it could be indeterminate, so there could be indeterminacy, but there could still be probabilities. It could be probabilistic indeterminacy in the sense that some locations are still more likely than others. Even
Well,
though,
yeah, but I can grant that because that's only coherent under the understanding of a form of frequentist apparatus. But the idea is that
yeah, but that's yeah.
frequentism is still a normative virtue, so that's not going to give any form of explanatory virtue. That's just
Wait, I don't know what you mean by that. What do you mean when you say frequentism is a normative virtue? I don't.
No, it's going to be a normative virtue. So, like an analogy,
Okay.
I can analogize this with God, right? Say that in the Bible, God has an intentional state for which He furnishes the universe, but nothing generates the idea that, in virtue of what does God have this intentionality, right? So it's going to be the case that a theist will argue it's more probable God produces this universe for some intentional state for which the intentional state is actually not a virtue because it's normative for which it gives reference to some explanation to the explanandum of why it is the case God actually has an intentional state. So frequentism just generates the idea that because it's more frequent, it's more probable, but it doesn't actually access some set of epistemic conditions for why it is the case that it is more frequent. Right? It just says it's probable.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So it's going to be a
Yeah.
normative virtue under that set of apparatus.
Wait, so are you just saying that frequentism is just an apparatus that tells you what's more probable, but it doesn't like tell you why it's more probable? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's just an apparatus that doesn't derive any form
Yeah,
of
that's fine.
virtuous
Yeah,
energy.
I'm not trying to explain why
Explanatory
it's more
scope.
probable.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm not talking about why it's more probable.
So then
Just saying
in
like
that
what
case,
is
yeah, you would be
probable.
right.
Yeah. Okay.
Hello. So what was the topic like originally about? Like the existence of a
Oh
god
yeah,
or
it
necessary
was yeah, it
existence?
was about like some
I'm pretty sure it was
arguments
about
like
the existence
early
of God.
design argument, and then
Like
he the argument for he said that like it's impossible like for these sorts of complexities to occur without a mind creating them. I asked him for the argument for that.
Is
He
that
provided, like,
logically impossible for clarity?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, he didn't specify the modality, but he just said they can't occur.
Well, he takes it to be logical. That's going to be a lengthic modality. But that's going to just mean that's going to boil down to the fact that you would have to demonstrate an argument in which you represent
yeah. I asked him for the argument, but he just dodged.
Wait, Darth, in Texas, what modal category would you say God is in?
What do you mean?
I don't even understand.
That question doesn't even make sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even know
category. You guys don't know what that means? You guys don't know what an existential modal category is?
No, you're asking like what modal category.
So when you
God
talk about
in?
existential, that's just going to be the nature of existence. So
yeah, so like would you say that God is
for
something?
Modality would probably be just a lengthic.
Yeah, so I'm saying, like, would you say God is like a possible being and non-being, i.e., impossible, or just necessary?
Well,
Obviously, I
I
know
would
you'd
just say
negate
God
necessity.
is possible.
Did you say God possible or impossible?
Well, it depends what model of God you use. I take God to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
a kind of arbitrary conceptual
I'm
necessity
saying,
upon the
like, yeah,
properties
obviously,
of some deity, right?
I would define a God
If you take
under
the
a
Christian or
notion.
Islamic God, in many
A
scenarios, I
Muslim
believe
God, but
that's
like
even
obviously,
possible.
if I'm gonna argue against an atheist, I'm right off the bat gonna like, because obviously
Yeah,
to argue the Muslim God, you have to like have a foundation first, right? Then you go more
yeah,
into theology, because obviously some claims within the Islamic God regard theology. So if I'm going to have everyone believe in Islamic God, I would just have them first prove Islam and everything else follows. But if I'm going to disprove an atheist and just disprove their position as a whole, I'd prove more of a theistic position that doesn't necessarily revolve around like a personal God that interacts with creation. So I think that Ibn
yeah.
Sina's um
Well,
contingency
I don't
argument
see how
that's
you
what people
derive.
does.
Um, I don't understand how from a variable within, I guess, an understanding of first order calculus or logic, how from a variable you would derive at some individual constant, which is to say that given some X
Say what?
property set of qualities that condition the universe, which I can grant the argument for God, that wouldn't entail the Muslim God.
Yeah. Obviously, yeah. I never really said that. If I were to prove right now, Ibn Sina's contingency argument, I'd say refutes the atheist God, but doesn't directly prove the Islamic God. I never said it proves the Islamic
Wait,
God.
can you actually render that argument? Because do you have
Okay,
like
well,
you have,
how do you account for modal monism?
What is it?
Modal monism, which is going to be a form of modality that rejects modal realism, is the idea that only the is the actual state of affairs. So, in virtue of the fact one can't demonstrate evidence for God, rather than that being an argument from ignorance, the idea would be, if it is the case there's no evidence represented for God, it is the case there is no evidence for God. So, do you have an argument against modal monism?
Wait, did you say that there is no evidence? Say the last part bit again. I don't even know what you just said.
Yeah, the idea of modal monism is that it's going to derive actuality in reference to the is.
Yeah, I know, but you said something about the last part regarding no evidence.
Yeah, so it's going to say if there is no evidence for God, which is dependent on some set of arguments that whether or not one can actually give undercutting defeaters for, or even falsification, it's going to demonstrate God isn't true.
So if there's no evidence, then God isn't true. Yeah, obviously, I would say that you would be justified in disregarding a God. Obviously, if there is no evidence for it, that's why that's why I would like assert like arguments against
But
that, right?
but within
But
modal monism, if it is the case there's insufficient evidence for God, then it's just going to be there is insufficient reason to believe in God. Or even the
yeah,
case
that's
if you
fine.
can't account for like skeptical scenarios, it's going to be the
Yeah,
case it's
that's fine.
okay. Well, then
But
that's just going to kind of extinguish
I'm saying that
the view of
I
God.
know. But then obviously then we just like refute the notion and all the objections against the arguments given, right? But what I'm asking like beforehand is like what modal category would you even like ascribe to a God? Would you say that there is a possible world in which he does exist? Would you assert that
Well, that's
it's
going to depend on
undetermined?
the
Would
model of
you
God, like I said.
Yeah, I
yeah.
know, just a God that's non-specious. Well, obviously I would define a God as this, right? If
But
you
saying,
were to
listen, like
be
because
hold
some
on, if
people some people could define God as like say you define God as like a necessary being. On that case, like
a lot more than
like
that.
if you like on there's a system of modal logic where if you just say it's possible,
You're
you
just going to
can
need to
just
derive that necessity.
yeah,
Yeah, that's five axioms. So if you were to assert that, for example, obviously in all models, right, all models would agree that God is obviously a necessary existence, both essentially and modally. If you're going to make the assertion that they're like, I would define a God in this context
Well,
as
the
not
idea
just
of God is
necessarily
seeming
like,
primitive, so I don't
I
understand how
know,
you
not,
derive
no, not,
necessity.
not, I would just define like, if I were to prove a God, right, I think I'd go into the definition that he's a non-specious, temporal, metaphysical,
No, that's
necessary
just going to
existence,
be
both modally and
incoherent in
necessary.
all possible worlds. The idea that God is necessary. If he's necessary, he's not
Yeah, so if
contingent.
you're obviously, yeah, because
But
you'd
that
probably
means you
ascribe
can
this.
make
Yeah,
an
that's
inference for God without the necessity of classical logic for
Yeah,
inferential
so you'd
justification.
probably just say that God's modal category would be something of impossibility. If we obviously, because this is
I
how
don't
we
think you're
define God.
understanding. That's just gonna be the
I know
idea
what you're
that
saying, right? You're
you're
saying that
justifying
there's
God in virtue of
necessity.
nothing.
No, you're saying that necessary being under this context would not hold in any possible world. Thus, you just make the conclusion that God's modally impossible, right?
No,
So
there's
you
gonna
wouldn't
just be
fall
no
to the
intelligible
problem that's
inference
five
for
axis.
God.
Huh?
There's just gonna be no intelligible inference for God at all.
Yeah,
yeah.
I would just, yeah, I would, yeah, exactly, yeah. So you would just say if there's no possible world in which God exists, right? What do you think that means?
Well, that's just gonna be incompatible with any folk notion or primitive. It's just gonna be an incoherent like set of gibberish. Like I don't think you're understanding. If if it is the case God's necessary, then the concept of contingency is not
Like,
predicated upon him. That means that you can infer God without inferential systems. because no notions
I'm back. I
are
didn't hear what you
dependent
said
for
because I had to
justifying
deafen.
God.
At the deafen, so I didn't hear what you said.
Yeah, so if it's the case God is, necessary, he's not going to be contingent.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
Yeah, so that means you can derive God without the contingency of classical logic. So you're going to be able to derive classical logic independent of some logical system or set of axioms. Meaning, in virtue of nothing can you derive God, which
Yeah, I
is
don't,
just
I
going
don't
to be
agree. I would say
incoherent.
there would be some sort of proof, but that's not really my question here. That's not really what I was asking. That's not really my point either.
Well, what are you trying? Are you trying to give an
I
argument?
didn't even argue
I'm just
anything.
trying to
I didn't
explain
even
how
argue.
saying God is necessary is just not going to make any sense. And in no
Well, I mean,
way are you going to
yeah,
derive
obviously, because you would just assert that there's no direct proof for this, but I'm saying that, well, I didn't even give a proof.
Well,
I
I
didn't
don't
even give like an
care for
argument yet.
proof because evidence comes cheap, and I can grant evidence, but under the understanding of necessity, there's not going to be any compatible evidence with God unless you affirm the principle
Well,
of
obviously contend that
explosion,
fact.
which is
That's not really like
going to be not
I would
compatible.
obviously contend that fact, but like, I'm saying that that's not really. I didn't even make an argument. I just simply asked the question. I asked,
How do you make a contention
what
for that?
modal category? I said, what modal category would you ascribe God to be in? Right? It's you don't have to go that deep. I'm
Okay.
not even making an argument. That's just the question.
Okay, well, I just
So
grant
obviously,
God is
I know
immortal.
you would just say that. I know you would say just say that of impossibility because you kind of just answered. You said that there's no possible world in which a necessary existence can exist.
Yeah.
Right? So obviously that would just be the assertion that is impossible, since that by definition, if there's no possible world where if in all possible worlds this thing fails, then it's just impossible.
Not
So
how that
obviously you would
works.
be
I'm
committed
not.
to saying impossibility.
No, so saying that he's not necessary just
What do you
means he
mean
can
no?
either be possible or impossible.
No, I know. If
No,
yes, if he's not necessary, listen, Flames. If he's not necessary, then he'd be either possible or impossible. But I just said that if you make the assertion that if he does not exist in any possible world, then he's modally impossible. I never said that if you negate his necessity, then he's either possible or impossible. He's not either impossible or impossible.
Okay.
If you negate necessity, then yes, that does open that room. But once you say that there is no modal category, or then once you say there is no possible world where he exists, then he's just modally impossible by definition. But that was just my question. I never even made an argument, by the way. But
Okay.
I
Yeah,
think
well-
that the argument I would make.
But you said you
Right.
do commit to the idea God's necessary.
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
and I would
that's
say
just
that
not
there's
gonna
proof for
make
a
sense.
necessary existence.
Yeah, well,
Why wouldn't that
wait,
make sense?
wait.
Well, that's what I
how
was
is it?
Yeah, I know, but that's not really. I was just giving a definition for him, right? But so you would say that it's not possible for God to be necessary, that there's not possible for a necessary existence to exist, due
Well,
to the fact
how
that
do you
there are.
infer that God's necessary?
Well, first I think I'd make an argument, right, for a necessary existence. So I say that God is a necessary existence by identity. So I think I would utilize a Mancino's contingency argument to derive a necessary existence, and you'd be committed to believing in a necessary existence. And I would say that's the only reason.
Well,
Now I
that's
know
just
you
gonna
could
lead to
say that
world
there are
collapse.
skeptical claims. Yeah, I'm fine with that. Yeah, so what?
Either that, or you have exhaustive knowledge in which, in reference to all possible scenarios or competing hypotheses, you can demonstrate God is more probable, for which that would just be
Well, yeah, I
necessary.
wouldn't give this argument that I would give would not necessarily rely on probability, since it's not
Well,
necessarily
so
a
that's just
theological
gonna mean
argument,
you're
but
never
rather.
gonna derive God's necessary.
Yeah, no,
under
no,
any
what?
standard.
No, just because I'm denying that my argument is that of probability, doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be that of certainty. Because if it's not that of probability, it's also that of impossibility,
I mean, how
in
you gonna
which,
derive it all be the case God exists?
or
That's
it's
just a
certainty.
naturalistic
I would
argument.
just simply say that it's certainty, since that
reference
this
to
argument one would rely mainly on rational perspective. So, like for example, if you already agree with the fact or with the notion that everything is grounded by the configuration of their parts, right, i.e., that they're contingent, thus the need of an action is a cause, right? Then you'd have to. Then we could put the totality of contingent things into a set. And obviously, the set in specific doesn't matter if it's infinite or finite. With regards to the particulars in it, it would still be grounded by the configuration of their parts. Thus, the need of a action is a cause. This cause would also be necessary, i.e., essentially necessary uncaused, or modally or contingent. Obviously, it can't be contingent, as it would contradict the set, because the set contains all totality of contingents. Thus, it would have to just be necessary. So that's essentially how I would justify the existence of a necessary existence.
Well, I mean,
Sorry,
At least
you mind-
essentially
if you
modally
don't know
speaking.
set theory, you can put a set of naturalistic numbers in which you have a transcendental
What?
set. So
Wait, real quick. Do you mind? Can you actually post the argument in the VC text? I just.
Let me think. What'd you say, Darth?
yeah, that's just gonna boil down to the idea that you have the set of all natural numbers within contingencies within a set for which a transcendental numerable set would condition that. So that's not going to be the idea that a non-contingency can't explain a set of infinite contingencies. An infinite regress is just not going to be logically incoherent. I mean, under the scope of
Yeah,
set
but
theory.
nonetheless, if you make the assertion that there is an infinite number of these contingent things, they're still in that set, and by virtue of them being contingent, right? We would assert that this set in general would just be something contingent. So if you make the assertion
Well, that's just going to be
that
a
this is an
hindrance to
infinite
set
number,
theory. That's not how sets
I know,
work.
but if you're going to make it, if you're going to make the assertion
It's
that
just
there's
that
an
I
infinite
know.
number of contingents,
It's
well,
just
by
that
definition of them being contingent, I can make the assertion that we
not
define a
listening to
contingent
him.
thing as by virtue of being both essentially as a contingent, thus in need of an extrinsic cause. So the only way that you could essentially go about
guy's
this
fucking
negating some sort of
sense.
extrinsic cause would just say that their cause are just brute. They have no reason for their existence, which then I'd probably just argue against the fact that brute contingencies exist.
Wait, but can you post the argument in VC text?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm on my Mac right now, so I don't
Well,
have
you're
the
never going to
argument,
derive brute, right? I'm a fictionalist about brute fact. The idea that something's going to be brute. It's just going to be the
yeah, it's
idea
fine.
that
I
in
am
virtue
too.
of nothing is it the case that's justified, which is still compatible
Well,
with
yeah,
the
I would just
idea
simply
that
say,
it's an it's just a non-justified proposition.
yeah, I don't, yeah, exactly, yeah, I don't think brute contingency is justified. Yeah, I would
Yeah,
just
so
simply
I
say
could just
that by
say I have a
virtue.
dog, and that's a brute fact. And then in virtue of nothing, since it's brute, would I have
Well, I mean, yeah,
some
well, by brute
justificatory
fact by
scope?
definition.
Yeah, so brute
Yeah, I
facts are
would
just going
disagree
to
with
be
brute facts.
incoherent. You're not going to be able to
Yeah,
derive
obviously,
brute
yeah, I
facts.
agree with you. Yeah. I would say that brute facts by definition are just something inexplicable, obviously, since that they have no explanation for their existence. So obviously they have an explanation against their explicability, or they have a reason against their explicability, which then I would essentially just say that brute facts in this context are just identical to logical impossibilities. It's that logical impossibilities are inexplicable and have a reason against their explicability. Likewise with brute facts. So essentially you just have no reason. You'd have no way to distinguish this concept of a brute fact with the concept of a logical
I just
impossibility or
wanna
an impossibility in
I
general.
actually do want to talk about the argument, but I
But
don't.
yeah, I actually agree with you, Darth. Brute contingencies are impossible.
Incoherent?
But a lot of
Yeah.
atheists,
Are
for some
brute
reason,
Yeah, they are.
contingencies impossible?
yeah, brute contingencies are. I would say that yeah, they're impossible and incoherent.
Logically impossible?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
would say
by
so.
definition.
What's the contradiction?
Yeah, obviously logical impossibility is a contradiction.
What's the contradiction in a brute contingency?
I just gave them.
Yeah,
No, what's the
the contradiction is going to be in virtue of some truth or some theory of truth for which I take truth to be that which is in reference to some inference for which the connective between the correspondence of the nature of the utterance and the actual quality of truth for which truth is a
So you
criterion.
take the
So
correspondence
if you
theory.
just-
it's going to be that
if
truth
you-
is an unconditional quality which is not compatible with the criterion. Right? I don't take
Yeah, if
brute
you just
facts as
define
compatible.
truth in a way, yeah, but if you just define truth in a way that says brute facts can't like a brute fact being true, like it's impossible. I mean, sure, but that's just how you. I mean, that's just trivial. You just define like on my account of truth, like I define truth in a way that there can be brute facts. I don't understand how that.
Yeah, well, I don't.
Yeah, but
I don't see how you derive
personally,
God, right? Because in terms of explanatory virtue, it's going to be economically just cheaper without, deflating with unnecessary ontological commitments like a spiritual realm.
Yeah,
Additional entities, especially with them possessing their own set of ontological commitments, say qualities or attributes like consciousness or omnibenevolence or any form of omni property, which you're not even going to be able to demonstrate. You can't infer from God has the capacity or the necessary power to create a universe, therefore he has all powers or he's omnipotent, right? All you're going to be able to find through the apprehension of such state of affairs is that it is the case God has the necessary ability to furnish a universe, nothing more.
yeah, I would say that obviously like all these arguments for God, yeah, they would essentially just prove a causal power, as for example the argument that I gave of Vincent's contingency argument. It would at least
Can you
require
repeat
this
the
being to
argument?
have causal power, but
Well,
whether this
I don't
causal power is something
agree with
omnipotent.
causality.
What?
What do you mean?
Well, I'm actually sympathetic to that type of. So I think the best you can do with causality is kind of have like a semantic analysis of it. I don't even know what causation is supposed to be uttered.
Well, the idea is that
Oh,
causality is a
depends on
temporal
what.
notion. So to say God is a causal mechanism for which furnishes the universe is just to say God is causal. Unless somehow you can make an
Yeah.
analysis for distinguishing
Obviously, by
causality from a
virtue,
temporal notion.
if you make the assertion, right, like for example, all arguments, like obviously the argument that I gave at Vincent was contingency argument, that would involve or commit you to admit that God has this sort of causal power or this necessary
It just-
existence, mainly because
it's
he has
post
to
the
actualize
argument.
a set, which involves causal power. But you were asking Texas for why brute contingencies are something impossible, right?
Yeah.
So I would say that we define something impossible as being
This guy's
having
just
a reason against its existence,
this guy's
right?
an idiot.
Thus having a reason against its
something
explicability.
something's impossible.
It's just
Like
a contradiction.
if it entails a contradiction.
The recording.
Yeah, and obviously we define a contradiction. I would say contradiction and possibility are just the same thing. So
Yeah, what's
essentially,
the contradiction entailed
So-
by a brute contingent?
yeah. So I would just say a logical impossibility is just a contradiction, and obviously we just
Yeah,
define that as having a reason
what's
against
the
its existence.
contradiction entailed?
It is
Yeah,
here.
I'm going with that. Right?
Okay.
So we define that as having a reason against its existence.
Oh no, a
Thus the reason.
contradiction is the conjunction of a proposition and its negation.
Yeah, yes, but I'm saying with regards to existential things. So, for example, you're just giving an example of a proposition here. Obviously, in propositional,
Can't you just
propositionally
answer the
speaking.
question though?
Yes, I'm answering your question, but you just like
But you keep like, I
gave me
don't
some
like,
sort
you
of
guys
explanation.
all do this. It's so
I
Texas,
annoying.
know, but
Texas,
you're
interrupting him,
dude,
Texas,
you're
interrupting him.
yes, you're contending the
okay,
way that I'm
fine.
defining. You're contending the way I'm defining contradiction here. And obviously, contradiction with regards to propositions, what you gave is saying that both P and negation P are true at the same exact, or are both true and false, right? That's just true, right? The proposition is both true and false. But that's not how I'm defining it. I'm defining it existentially speaking. So if you're going to make the assertion that a concept is something impossible, then it lacks potentiality to exist. Thus, not just being possible, since that possible would have no reason for or against its existence, but we're defining something as impossible, thus would have a reason against its existence, i.e. a reason against its explicability. So when you
You're
say that
just
something is
saying-
brutally contingent,
I get it. You're just saying that
I'm not done. I'm not even done yet.
He's-
you just define impossible in this way that like no.
Texas, you're not letting him finish.
Yes,
No,
so then when
I
you
get the
define a
point. I don't
contingent
need
thing,
it. He doesn't need it. Like I get the point. He's
No,
Yes,
he
but
doesn't need
you're-
to finish. He doesn't need to finish.
when you define something brutally contingent, I'm just going to go to the way you define a brute contingent thing. Obviously, if you're going to define something brute contingent, then it's not going to be explicable. It's going to be inexplicable.
I
Thus
agree.
having a reason against its explicability. So how would you distinguish something logically impossible and something
Yeah.
brutally contingent under this?
Yeah, so a brute contingent thing is just a contingent fact that doesn't have an explanation.
Yes,
That fact doesn't. So if that fact can still be logically possible, like that fact
no,
doesn't-
it's yes.
like,
Well,
in this
that's just begging
case,
the
that
question.
fact doesn't entail a
But
contradiction.
that's just begging the question, since that we define something as having no explanation, as I literally just said. Yes, it has no explanation. It's
Wait, you
inexplicable.
don't know what you're talking about. Wait, hold on.
I literally just said
Yeah.
that something having no explanation. Yes, you just repeated my claim.
No.
Just told you that
You think
something
there's-
brutally
you think
contingent
there's a
has no
contradiction to
explanation.
brute
Hence, it's
contingent
what? It's
facts?
inexplicable. And
You
if
think
it is
there's a
inexplicable, if you make an assertion that something is inexplicable, you can't simply just emptily assert it. Thus, it has
You
a
think
reason
that-
against its
Do you think
explicability.
there's a contradiction entailed by a brute contingent fact?
I think it literally is, quite frankly, identical to a logical
Do you think
impossibility
there's
by
a
definition. Yes.
contradiction entailed by a
Yes,
brute
I just told you, and I showed how they're logically.
Right, just tell me what the tell me. What
I just
the,
told you that there is no way to distinguish a logical
No,
impossibility.
tell
and a
me.
brute
No,
contingent thing.
stop. Tell me what the conjunction of the prop and negation is. Just tell me what it is.
I just told you there is no way
No,
for
you
you to
didn't.
distinguish a
You did
logical
not.
impossibility. Okay, hold on.
What's the
Listen,
first
listen. Yeah. Tell me the distinction.
No,
between a
no.
logical
Stop
impossibility.
dodging. No.
What do you mean
stop.
stop dodging? That's the
Texas,
argument.
Texas, it's not dodging.
I'm done. Hold on. I'm serving this guy. The argument is that there is no way to distinguish a
Again.
logical impossibility and a brute contingent thing. Give me a distinction, because if you have no distinction, then they're just used synonymously. as
But
definitions
just
here.
answer his question again. I don't see what the problem is.
Yes, because that is my argument, and now he's asking me a question for the arguments, right? Or essentially to give him
Okay,
the
it
argument.
doesn't
That
matter,
is the
but just
argument.
answer his question so he can
He's
follow up.
claiming. I know, but AC is claiming I'm dodging.
AC, we're not
You
gonna
have to
have
mute him.
side glazing competition, okay? FE?
Listen,
Like
he's
it's-
claiming he wants me to answer his question, but the question holds no relevance to my actual thing here, right? He doesn't understand my argument, so he just presses me on some random bullshit that has no relevance.
I'll mute him so he can just speak real quick.
Okay, so I want him to actually give me a distinction if the contention is
Yes
what I am
or
saying.
no? Do you believe there's a contradiction entailed by brute contingent facts? Yes or no?
I literally just said, okay, what did I just say? Actually, summarize everything I
Can
just
you
said. Go ahead.
stop dodging and answer the question?
I'm not dodging. I literally said 20 times. It
Okay,
quite
yes
frankly
or
is.
no? Yes.
Texas, Texas,
Okay,
Texas,
I'm gonna mute.
calm
I'm just
down.
gonna communicate. He's gonna raise his
Yo, what
voice
was
like
that?
a little rabid demonic dog.
Wait,
I'm gonna mute him, right?
Wait, dude is freaking out. Is he good?
I'm gonna
Like,
mute
what
this
the hell?
rabid demonic dog, right?
Ow,
I literally
what
just
the fuck?
just answered your question by saying it is identical to the definition of a logical impossibility. Thus, you have no way of distinguishing a logical impossibility and a brute fact, right? So,
Like,
quite
bro's yelling.
frankly,
Wait,
you
time on
honestly,
shit.
I don't know why he's acting all demonic and screaming in his mic. No, go ahead. Watch. He's gonna scream right now. So, answer the question. I just answered.
Yes
your question.
or no? Like dumbass up, nigga. Like,
Yeah.
what?
I don't know why you're just
Okay.
dodging the question.
I'm not dodging. I just answered your question.
He answered
Do you know
multiple
what the
times by
question
now.
was? Wait, so do you know what the question was?
You said, "What is the contradiction?"
Yeah. Well, yeah. So what was the contradiction?
I just said, yes,
the
there is no
hell?
way for you to distinguish a logical impossibility and a
that's
proof
not what a
fact, and I just showed
contradiction
how you cannot distinguish them.
You
Now it is
agreed.
upon the burden
Okay.
of proof for you
Okay,
to make a
one second.
distinction here.
Yeah. Okay. So you agree that if I asked you for contradiction,
Yes, but
answer was-
and I
wait,
gave you it. Yes.
are you gonna let me finish? Yeah. And your answer was not a contradiction. You agree with that, right?
No, I actually showed how it is identical
Okay.
to a logical
Do you think?
impossibility.
Do you think do you actually think you told me what the P and not P was?
No, that is with regards to
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm asking.
speaking about-
Good job. Yeah, so you
That
admit
is
you
yes,
didn't
but when you
do it.
make the
Good job,
hold
yeah,
on,
good
when you
job.
make the fact, here we go.
Good job.
When
you
you
admit that you didn't.
No, I
answer
didn't admit
it.
anything. I actually
Good
clarified
job. Now
prior.
tell me.
Hold on, I clarified
Tell
prior.
me what the
Can I
P and
speak?
not P is.
Yes, I actually clarified prior that when you make the assertion, that is with regards to propositions.
No one see-
That a
does anyone
proposition cannot be
understand why
both
he's
true.
dodging the
It
question?
cannot be both P and negation P, i.e. true
Yeah,
and
tell
false at
me
the same
what the
time.
P and not
But
P
we're
is.
not speaking about
Okay,
propositions.
what's the P and not
We're
P?
speaking about brute facts.
What's
When we're
the
speaking
P and
about an
not-
existential impossibility here,
Sorry, what's
this
the P and
essentially
not
means that it has a reason against
Why
its
are you
existence,
dodging the
i.e.
question?
non-being. No, hold
Why
on,
are you
because
dodging-
you're misunderstanding
Can
and
you
you're
stop
conflating two
dodging the
things.
question?
Okay, here we go. I'm muting you again, right? Because obviously you're not letting me speak and you're not going to listen. I already said that you're conflating between propositions here and that which is existentially impossible. When you're speaking about propositions, yes, an impossibility is typically defined as something, or a contradiction is defined as something which is both true and false. But this is with regards to propositions. So when you're speaking and you make the assertion that, for example, the Christian God, or I'm just giving a random example, the God is something impossible, then you're ascribing the existential modality of it being impossible, thus having a reason against its explicability, a reason against its existence, which is not necessarily defined as P and not P, right? But has a reason against its explicability, and by virtue of that, it would obviously lack potentiality to even exist, right? And that's how I'm necessarily defining something logically impossible or modally impossible here. And you cannot give a distinction between that and a brute fact by definition, right? So you have to give me this distinction. I already clarified that we're not speaking about propositional contradictions here, or abstract compositions, but rather concrete contradictions in reality, right? So go ahead, please actually answer my question now that I've cleared up your conflation, right? Because obviously I already clarified this before. I don't know why you brought it up again. But please answer my question head on, or I'm just going to mute you again for just dodging and diverting the topic.
Yeah, so I don't really know what that ramble you just went on was, but do you have an answer? Do you have a contradiction
go.
that's
Yeah.
upheld by the brute fact?
I'm not even gonna. You're just being insensitive. I'm not even gonna.
He didn't. He's.
I'm not even going to.
Flame, do you think he answered the question, Flame? Do you
He did-
Yes,
he did-
yes. I showed how
he
you're
did-
conflating two things. Yes,
Sorry, this guy doesn't. I'm not talking to the person that doesn't know anything. I'm asking Flame.
yes. And I just
Brother.
told you
Sorry, I'm
that
not
you're
asking the
conflating
person
two
that
concepts,
doesn't know
right?
anything.
Conflating
brother.
between a propositional contradiction and a concrete contradiction.
Fucking Catholic. It's trolling.
You know,
He's obviously a troll. This guy's a
you,
fucking
you
retard,
can't
bro.
can't just say he doesn't know. He actually knows more than me about philosophy.
He doesn't
Like,
know
it's
philosophy.
just- no, he
told
does.
him. I
He
literally
does.
just told him. Okay, so this is essentially what just went down.
If he knew philosophy, he
said-
would understand what Jad gave
He's
him
de-
examples
He's
of. He didn't.
defining a contradiction. Hold on, he's defining a contradiction. Well, actually, if you knew philosophy, you'd know that everything is identical to each other unless proven otherwise, as identity has no assumptions, while distinction has assumptions. So everything is identical to proven otherwise. So if I make the assertion that a logical impossibility is identical to a brute contingent thing, then it's the burden on you to show how there's a distinction. But nonetheless, I even showed in detail how you cannot even distinguish them. By definition, they are both the same by virtue of having a reason against their explicability, right? So everyone would accept that as essentially speaking an impossibility or not
I'm
being.
pretty sure Darth as well
regardless.
accepted it.
I mean, Darth, would you actually agree with that notion? What I'm saying, like Darth, I'm you.
I think he did agree earlier. I
You
when I
agree
when
that
he
brute
did.
contingents are incoherent, but I don't know if you'd agree with my arguments as to why they're incoherent.
I think he was agreeing with you earlier. Then until
I don't know
Tax
if you agree with my arguments.
Yes or no, Jad?
Bro,
Yes or
it's
no?
funny. He was literally speaking about a propositional contradiction, right? A propositional contradiction,
Just-
yes, is both true and false, right?
just like a bit like he needs to be a bit respectful. Like, I don't know the idea of
Yeah, I
insulting.
don't know. He just like
He was
accuses you
nice
of when he
at
doesn't
first. What
understand
happened,
something.
bro? Just
He
started
accuses you of
freaking out.
rambling. He accuses you of rambling, and then he like just
because
says,
he, does,
"Oh,
because he doesn't
everything-
understand you. Because he doesn't
He
understand.
doesn't,
you.
he doesn't understand basic philosophy. Just be humble and admit. Say, yes, I don't understand what you're saying. Can you please put it down in a little bit more
I
detail?
mean, he did
Ask for
when
some
we he did when we were talking about biology. He did admit that he doesn't know anything about biology.
Yeah, I don't know. This guy's just. I don't know what's wrong with this guy. He's just a rabid demonic
Discord
dog.
bot.
Wait,
Discord
with
bot.
Darth,
Tax
Darth.
is-
Hold on, Darth. With what contention, like, do you think you'd have with my argument?
I wasn't here. Like the moment I went silent. I got-
Essentially, would you agree that something impossible has a reason against its existence?
Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, I basically said that an impossibility, it cannot be distinguished by definition from something of a brute contingent thing, by virtue of them both having a reason against their explicability. Then he answered, and
Well,
he
that's why I
essentially
take
gave me
brute
the
facts to be fictionalist.
exactly. Yeah, me too.
That's what I told you. That's what I told you. He agreed with
Exactly,
you.
yeah.
I told you.
Now,
Cool.
essentially, what he did was complete a propositional contradiction by asking, where is P and not P both, like, well, where's this thing true and false at the same time, essentially, right? Which is just conflating a propositional contradiction with like a concrete contradiction. There is an existential one, right? It's like, I don't know what's wrong with this. And he started like screaming at me and saying I'm just rambling and so on.
I don't
Crazy.
know. Very
You were.
interesting. Like I really came here to talk to him about biology, but I feel like
He's obviously just a troll. Like no one is gonna
Biology?
stream like that
No
on
one's
this.
talking about biology, right?
no, that was
No,
before
prior to you.
before you joined.
Yeah,
Before
you
you
guys
joined.
Already
strayed
coming
away
speaking
pretty
of
far.
evolution.
Not gonna lie.
Yeah,
Like,
they're speaking about like evolution apparently. I don't know biology, evolution.
I'm talking about about chemistry, static chemistry, and like the origin of life,
I'm
beginning.
gonna mute him though because I have to go soon. So I'll just let him
Biogenic.
speak and you guys continue.
So I think the weird thing is like, so Saint Jed, is that how your name is pronounced? So
I'm not going to converse with you.
yeah,
if
so
you
you
just
actually
wanna
don't know
continue.
anything about
Yeah,
philosophy.
sure. I don't know anything about
Thanks,
philosophy.
that's childish. That's
Yeah,
childish. That's childish.
Now, I just want to know.
I don't know the difference between a propositional contradiction and what a concrete contradiction. Right, you're right.
I don't. Yeah. So I just want to know, when you say that brute facts are impossible, are you saying that a brute fact obtaining would entail a logical contradiction, or are you not saying that?
I answered that question about 1,000 times, and I
Yeah,
already said I
just
have
want.
to go.
Well, I
And
just want to be
not,
clear.
and it's so clear that you don't know basic philosophy and you're just insincere and
can you-
arrogant to
can
admit
you-
that. So I'm not even going to
Evan,
converse with
can you
something
answer
arrogant
that
and unfruitful like
question?
that. Right?
Can you answer that question, please?
Yeah, I answered your question about 1,000 times. I said they're quite frankly
can you
identical to each other. Definition,
No,
yes.
can you repeat what? But okay, but listen. Again, I'm asking you a yes or no question. So when you say a brute fact is
I
logically
said yes,
impossible,
they're identical in definition.
so you're saying yes, a brute fact would
You
entail
cannot
logical.
distinguish a logical impossibility from a brute fact.
Okay, yeah. So to be clear,
I
you're
don't
saying
disagree on
yes, a brute fact would entail a logical contradiction, right?
Not just entail, it quite frankly is by identity.
Okay, yeah. So I just want you to tell me first. Okay, it's going to be 2 steps. Let's see if we can follow this. So first, tell me what the P and not P is. All right.
Yeah,
tell me
again,
what
yeah,
that
exactly. Yeah, that's just you're conflating propositional contradictions with concrete contradictions.
What?
You just did it again.
No, a
I'm not.
contradiction.
You're obviously
Wait,
insincere.
you don't actually wait. A contradiction is just wait. A contradiction is the conjunction of a proposition in its negation.
Yes, but we're not speaking
so
about
tell me-
propositions here. We're
tell me
speaking about
what-
existential
He's not.
things.
He wasn't talking about propositions. He wasn't talking
We're
about
speaking about
propositions.
existential things here. So when you
So
make the
you-
assertion that, for
are you-
example, something in reality, like a being is something impossible, i.e. non-being, then this means
She's
it has
just
a reason against its
trying to
existence.
dodge my ram. I don't under. Okay.
Exactly. You just call
You
it-
just
yeah,
don't know. You just don't know
again,
Texas. You
Ross,
just don't know.
again.
You just don't know.
Ross,
You just
every
don't
single
know.
time you correct him and say, hold on, you're conflating between two things. Yeah, obviously, yeah, I agree that, like, yeah, but like he's speaking. Yeah, but I'm speaking about like with regards to like the concept or in reality, not just like the statement or like this proposition or something that could be truth happens, right? I'm speaking about like if I were to make the assertion that okay, humans are like brutally fact, right? Or I'm making like you have the concept of a brute fact,
Right.
definitionally speaking, and then you have like a concept or like a logical impossibility by definition. I'm saying that these two things cannot be distinguished because they're both defined as having a reason against their explicability, right? And then he goes on to define whatever true and false, just with regards to propositions. But when we actually define that is what a contradiction is. But when we go to define a contradiction, right, deeper, existentially speaking, right, we just say that it has a reason against its explicability. So that's why we assert that it cannot actually exist, right? Likewise with a brute fact, there's a reason against its explicability. Blah blah blah. They're logically impossible. They're identical.
Texas. Just like biology and chemistry, you need to read about philosophy as well.
Well, let's just be humble for once.
You agreed. There's nothing wrong with not knowing about these fields. There's nothing wrong with it. But that's why I told you I wouldn't. If I was you, I wouldn't say I'm an atheist. I would just say I'm agnostic. But it seems like you're kind of dishonest even with your own belief because it seems like you don't know a lot about a lot of fields in science. All right. And trust me, Taxes, the more I learn about science, the more the reality of God's existence is true.
But I have to go because I have to.
That's smart.
I have to do something real quick because the guy was
Yeah,
gonna.
but I gave him analogies and stuff even before he joined Jet. I don't know.
I
Not
don't know,
working.
I recommend you can unmute him if you want.
It's not
He's
working.
probably gonna ramble about how I'm a retard, don't know anything about philosophy, blah blah blah.
I
But you
wouldn't
guys
say
talk
it's
to him
a
about
good,
whatever.
like these kind of disrespectful, like
I
assertions are pretty
recommend not
bad.
talking to him though. I recommend because he's obviously insincere.
There's another ex-Christian is muted as well. Damn.
Everyone's muted nowadays.
All right. Well.
Yeah, I gotta go. See you.
Yeah, I'll get.